Mrs. Mitchell, was working here at the Governor Bacon Health Center your first job in Delaware that you've ever had?
Well, no, actually I worked at the labor camps for foreign laborers for the Department of Labor because it was a government job and none of the hospitals in the state of Delaware would hire me, any of them, except I said I could have worked, he said keep moving, could have worked at the sanitarium, which I didn't choose to. So I left the idea of working there and began to work for the Department of Labor and took care of foreign laborers. And after that, I went to Philadelphia to work. I worked there at the Jewish hospital, which was really neat. I loved it, working there. I learned so much, and I knew so much about the Jewish people, and I really enjoyed it.
So in Philadelphia, you were caring for white patients.
That's right, in Philadelphia.
But then when did you come back to Delaware?
I came back to Delaware in 1948 when Governor Bacon Health Center first opened.
Okay.
And I was here preparing for the first patients. It was 4 nurses. I was the black one, the rest of them were white. And the reason I was hired is because they had planned to have segregation prevail everywhere. They had one building here that they were going to have just black patients in it. But what happened is there were never any patients to put in there, so I ended up working right here at Governor Bacon Health Center taking care of white patients.
You were talking about the legislators and how Mrs. Easterly and Mr. Mitchell were put in one of the buildings when the legislators came to make it look like they were, they had a lot of staff here.
Well, no, they wanted to make sure that black people were with black people. See, this was still segregation. It was 1948 and 49.
And that's right, because Mrs. Easterly and Mr. Mitchell also serviced white
yes, they both
students.
Did. Yeah.
Okay.
And her husband, Mr. Easterly,
yes.
he also did. So what they were trying to do is hide the fact that these black people were taking care of white students. See? So when the legislators came through, they would ask them to leave what they were doing and go and stand around in the one ward that was for black patients. So she did it and he did it. He had to go to the laundry.
Oh,
Mr. Easterly had to go
okay.
to the laundry. He was a professional man. And he had to go to the laundry. But Lit refused to go. He said, I'm not going anywhere. I don't do that. He's always been a rebel, you know.
Yes.
So he refused to do it. So he just went home. Said, you have to pay me for not doing anything because I'm not going to pretend that I don't teach, that I'm on that ward all the time. Miss Easterly went. She read to the patients, but not him. He wouldn't do that. It's the kind of thing that happened here all the time.
And that was in the 1940s, 1940s?
I came in 48 now. See,
Yeah.
this is just,
So
everything was still segregated.
Yes.
Everything was completely segregated. But just happens since there's only a few nurses here, you know, we all took care of the patients.
Yes.
So I didn't have to just take care of black patients. I was able to take care of everybody. And I think I've told you the story of when I also worked night duty a long time here.
Oh.
One night I went on duty and the lady, a woman and her husband were patients in Tilton Building. And the husband had cancer of the scalp, which means he had ulcers all over his head. So he needed to be dressed because he was suppurating, you know. So I went in to dress this patient, and she says to me, you are not going to put your black hands on my husband. So she didn't want me to take care of him, so I said, okay. So I walked out the room, and one of the attendants said to me, how can you stand that? I said, Mrs., I won't say her name, will need me before I need her. So I went about my business, doing my thing, and she, in the end, wouldn't let anybody take care of him but me. So she had to, I was the only nurse on duty, so I had to do it sometimes. So when I did do it, she wouldn't let anybody else do it. Just wait all day long until I got on duty to take care of her husband's head.
You were telling me on the way here about being an African American working in a facility during segregation and where your support had to come from.
Well, we realized, all of us growing up, that we had to get our emotional and social needs satisfied outside of our working community. That most people who took care of everybody, white people I'm talking about in particular, always got their own friends from where they worked, but I was never fortunate enough to do that, neither of us lit. So we had to find our own way of socializing.
I remember seeing some pictures of you skiing, and so
yes.
When did you start skiing?
Yeah, I can't remember which year, but I'm sure it was in the 50s.
In the 50s?
Yeah. And this was because I was following my husband's desires.
Yeah.
And so we used to go skiing, and we loved going to Vermont and to Canada because it just seemed like another world. Once we crossed the lines over into Canada, it just seems like, just something just happened to you because people accepted you. They didn't even look at what color you were. Uh, you just didn't, just didn't feel that thing that you feel here in the United States, that you weren't sure whether it's okay to go in someplace. You weren't sure what's all right to get on a ski lift. You didn't have any of those kinds of feelings at all when you went to another country. Then I might tell you that when I left Hilton Building and came down to Painter to work with nothing but epileptics, that I began to study for my baccalaureate degree. And I went to the University of Delaware as soon as they opened their doors, because they wouldn't allow any black people to come there either. It was completely segregated. So I was among the first who were able to do that. So I went to the University of Delaware, and it took me several years, I guess, to get enough credits, because I was already a registered nurse.
Yes.
And they didn't have a BSN program at that time, but they had a baccalaureate degree program, so I got my degree in science, so which was a good subject. But among the things they did to me here, the authorities would sometimes change my schedule all around, even though they knew when I had to go to class. Change it all around so that I would be absent from class. But I would just say to them, you fix that schedule any way you want it. I told you I had to go to class, and I'd just go. And one other time, there was a director of nurses who came from State Hospital to take care of us over here. And she came here to work, and she changed my shift. And I had been working the same shift for years, and she just suddenly decided she wanted to put me on 3 to 11 shift. And I was the supervisor at night. So I told her I wasn't going to work it. And she said to me, you'll either work it or you'll take that gate. And I said, I'm not taking the gate and not leaving either. This is my job, this is where I'll stay. Those are the kind of things. This was, they're trying to make me as unhappy on the job as I could be so I could leave. Because there was nobody here with a baccalaureate degree but me. I was working on one, because I didn't have it at that time. So they made things as unpleasant as possible for me not to go to school. But I went anyway. And all the time, and in the end, in those days, you had to do a residency at the University of Delaware 1 year. You had to live on campus. I had to take full courses, 5 courses. So I stayed on the campus, not stayed on the campus, but I had to do this year's residency. And during that time, I took a leave of absence. And they held that against me also, took a leave of absence. But I would come back every weekend to work when they needed to. I'm on leave of absence. And I would come back every weekend and to work. So when the year was over, then I came back to my job here, because I was a supervisor in Springville. I came back here, and they wouldn't give me my job back. Not only they would not give me my job back, they made me do the relief work for anybody else that was off duty. I happened to be the only person here with a baccalaureate degree, but they treated me this way, that they were just sorry, but somebody else was doing a better job than I was doing, and that I couldn't have my job back, but I could be the relief nurse. And those are the kinds of things that I had to handle, which I just handled. I just went on and did my job. So.
Now, when you got your baccalaureate degree, what happened?
Well, I was not really welcomed back here. I was not welcomed at all, since the director of nurses didn't have a baccalaureate degree. So they decided I was trying to take her job, which I really was not interested. I planned to do something further than Governor Bacon Health Center. So but they made it as unpleasant as possible, but I just stayed here until I got this request from Delaware State Hospital to come there to work. And at that time I didn't want to go, but I ended up going there.
Mrs. Mitchell, this is where you actually got started in terms of your work here at the hospitals. Tell me a little bit about this building.
Well, this building was for psychiatric patients, and it was built in 1963, a state-of-the-arts building.
And what was your impression when you first came to this hospital?
What disturbed me most about the hospital was new, brand new. But what disturbed me about it was that the patients themselves were all Caucasian, all white. And what disturbed me about this building was that no black people can come in this building. I came in here and I thought, I don't know where in the world can I work in this place. I'm here in charge of this building, and none of my own people can come in this building. It was a very disturbing factor to me.
All right. Now, where were the African-American patients?
The patients then were all housed in the annex part of the main building up here. There were 3 floors. And on those 3 floors were just all the patients who, were of color, black people. Unless if you were sick, And we had one sick ward where you could go if you were sick. But other than that, all of them, regardless of the acuity of their illness, or didn't make any difference. If you were black, that's where you went. And it really disturbed me to have to come here like this. When I saw those patients housed in the annex on those 3 floors, most of them were sitting in their own waste. There were lots of them were tied down to the beds, because restraints, as they were called it, tied down to the beds. Some of them looked like they hadn't had their hair combed in 2 or 3 years. They were, and at that time they didn't have any black attendants as far as that goes. They had just begun to hire black male attendants over on the male side, because it was a male side and female side, but they didn't have any black female attendants. And to my shock and amazement, the ones who were there didn't seem to want to be there, except that they kind of thought it was a big joke. You know, all the things that the patients did they thought was funny, and some of their actions were bizarre because they were ill.
Yes.
And these were the days before Thorazine had come in. And the patient's behavior was, some of it was bizarre. And they would tease them and have them say all kinds of things so that they could just enjoy the antics of the patients. Well, all of this made me feel very ill almost, just to come there to see this kind of thing happening to the patients. And the odor there, because you could see the patients weren't clean.
Yes.
The odor just made me ill. I had such a terrible headache when I walked in the doors. I told Dr. Chumian that I wasn't going to come back there anymore. And to my amazement, the other nurses in the hospital said about the same thing. Said they didn't want to come back here anymore, but they did not have the experiences that I had to see those people. I said, I just can't work in a place where you treat patients like this.
Now, this was in 1948.
1948.
I assume that by the time you came here in 63, even though African American patients weren't not able to go into the Springer building, their treatment in the main and the annex was different. Is that the case, or did you see a major difference in their treatment and their condition?
Well, about when 63 came, they were beginning, maybe about 65, they were beginning to do trials on Thorazine. So some of the behaviors were different, but the housing was still the same.
So the housing was still, so
segregated.
in almost 20 years,
it hadn't changed very much.
Even though the white patients were given this bright
in 1963, they were able to progress out of whatever they were living in over here to come over here. And this was admissions, and they were allowed to come, but still not the black patients. And I was dismayed.
Yeah.
I cannot work in this building because here I am working in all these wonderful surroundings, people coming from everywhere to look at it, and I couldn't have any of my own race. You know, it just was very disturbing to me. And this time I said to Louis Redding, I simply cannot work in that place. I can't work in those circumstances. And he said, you stay there, because by 1963, we're going to begin to desegregate all the hospitals in the state of Delaware. And so by 1964, we began to desegregate all hospitals.
Did you have any role in the desegregation of the hospitals here?
Well, yes, the government that gave grants to the institution had threatened to take away their funds if they did not desegregate their buildings, desegregate their patients. And so Lit and I, Lit as he was the state conference president at that time, had gotten a letter from the Hill Burton, I think it was, who asked him to look at all the hospitals up and down the state of Delaware. So Lit and I did that because I knew all the hospitals and I knew the directors and nurses and all of them. So we went up and down the state looking at all the hospitals to see how the patients were housed. And I guess to some people's amazement, all black patients were housed in the basement of, say, Milford Hospital, Nanticoke Hospital, Kent General Hospital, and of course this one was no different. In the hospitals in the city, they had special wards just for black people. And then in places like Kent General, we looked at Nanticoke, we looked at all of them. But to our amazement, we went into the basement of one of these buildings where all the black patients were. And when the patients had their beds rolled up, their heads would hit the pipes and things because they were down in the basement with the furnaces and all those kinds of things. And I don't care, regardless of your ailment, whether you were there for maternity reasons or any illnesses or surgery, you were in the basement.
You mean so a woman going in to deliver a baby could have been housed in the basement?
Yes. And even what really drove us insane is that the teachers are professionals. If they went in there for any kind of surgery or anything, they were all housed in the basement.
Mrs. Mitchell, you talked about your husband being state president. That was the president of the NAACP. He was president from, I believe, what, 1961 to 1991?
Well, it was 30 years.
Was in that time
in
period.
That time, yes. Mm-hmm.
But you were also very active in the NAACP in terms of getting memberships. So at the height of your NAACP activities, you were also working to desegregate the hospitals.
That's right.
All right.
That's right.
So this was, they were happening simultaneously. So you played a major role in desegregating the hospitals here in the state of Delaware then.
Well, you could look at it that way.
Yeah, I would think so.
If you were, that.
If
and then he, of course, had to report back to the government. And then when they threatened to take the funds away, then they began to work diligently on desegregating hospitals all over.
So when did the Springer building become desegregated? Do you remember about when? Was it shortly thereafter?
It might have been about 65 or something of that sort.
About 65.
Because they hadn't been here very long when they began to allow them to come in here.
All right. So then there was a change in 65. Did desegregation bring major change in this facility, or was it slow?
Desegregation was not exactly slow, because it takes time.
Yeah.
Patients didn't have any problems at all. Everybody kept thinking the patients would have a fit, and this was crazy, you know. But they were wonderful. It was the staff who had a fit. The staff really didn't want to see desegregation come about. But that's the way it goes, you know.
Now, you talked about the staff. Now, when you came here in '63, you were an African American. This was a segregated facility, but you had to supervise white staff. Is that?
I had all white staff, and the physicians there were all white. I remember that one physician would ask me every day, what was I doing here? What was my job here? Well, every day I would tell him what my job was, because he needed to know.
And your title then was?
I was supervisor of this building. And then I was promoted to assistant director of nurses, in charge of all the psychiatric services, which included the criminally insane building you talked about, this building, and any building that had psychiatric patients. We were divided into two things. We had the geriatric patients, psychiatric patients, and then we had the criminally insane patients.
So you made history here because you were probably the first African-American supervisor of a
Yes,
facility.
I think so, yeah.
And then you were probably the first African-American supervisor of nurses. Were you the first?
And when you say of nurses, you mean the whole state of Delaware?
No, I'm talking about in this
Oh,
facility.
yes.
Yes.
And first one to be assistant director of nurses
all right.
also.
Now, all right, so now I can understand why the building was named for you.
Okay.
Because you made history at this facility.
I did make some advances.
You were sort of the foot soldier at the head of desegregation of professional staff, because there were probably were there African American doctors? Were there any physicians?
Well, Dr. Pat Devnan, she was a psychiatrist.
All right.
Yes. And I didn't really get to work with her,
all right.
But she was here at the same time. And her husband, Charlie Devnan, because he wasn't a physician, but he also was here.
All right, so you three were some of the major professionals.
Yes, right. That's right.
Did you have any problems when you became assistant director of nursing?
Not too many problems with assistant director of nurses. Got a big write-up in the newspaper, and it was so great that I was assistant director of nurses. But then when our director left, that's when the problems really began. There was a big hullabaloo because we had three assistant directors of nurses by that time. And one had a baccalaureate degree, the other one had no degree, and then there was me, her. So somehow or other they all asked me if I would run. And I said, no, I don't want administration, I want to work with the patients. But then in the end, with all my colleagues asking me to try for the director of nurses, I tried. And even the director, as she was leaving, said, you have such a nerve. Why would you think that you could replace me? I said, well, I'll do just like you did. I get the very best people to run all these services that I'm not real familiar with, and that's how I'll do just like you did. If you can do it, I can do it. I was really stunned because we were such friends. like that. And then, you know, we had to get to the board of the trustees here before I was allowed to come here and be the director of nurses. So it was a lot of hullabaloo about it, but in the end, I received the job, so I went as director.
Now, after you received the job, did you have problems with staff?
Not too much. I really did very well as director of nurses and had no trouble. Well, there was a couple of little things that, you know, that I just, for instance, some of the doctors didn't want to really recognize me. But aside from that, I did pretty well.
So you did pretty well. Now, how long were you in the role as director of nursing? Do you remember how many years you?
11 years.
11 years
back. Yeah.
So when did you retire?
I retired in 1979. I've been retired 20 years.
There are a lot of smokestacks up on those buildings.
Years ago, everybody spoke of Delaware State Hospital as 7 stacks. I remember as a child how people used to be afraid to even walk down this street or ride down here, the street out there, because they were afraid of this place. It had crazy people in it. Huh. Yeah. And I think I told you we had 2,100 patients in all the buildings. A lot of them are going down now, and they use them for different things. Yeah.
So you had quite a number of years here. The majority of your career was spent here.
And really the happiest parts of my career is I really enjoyed working with psychiatric patients, and I enjoyed working with the staff here.
Yeah.
And I liked it when we had new nurses come and I could orient them. You know. Yeah. I always tell people the brightest moments of my life when 2 brand new nurses came here, just graduated, and I was then working on the Springer building. Yeah. I had a terrible time. I was supposed to be supervised, and I was the only nurse down there. So I had nobody to supervise. And then these 2 little nurses came, Bonnie Lawton and Miss Poncell, and they really brightened my life. I taught them how to be psychiatric nurses, and we really did very well. Yeah, so.
You know, what is interesting as I'm reflecting on what you've said to me today, the building, the Jane E. Mitchell building for the criminally insane, you were nominated for that building by staff, even though during your years there was resistance to your promotions by staff. In the end, it was really the staff that cared so much about you.
Yes, I'm not sure it wasn't the professional staff.
Oh, all right.
I think it was more the staff of the attendants and people who, you know, trained under me.
Yes.
And who still remember me when I come on the grounds. I understood that they're the ones who did all the voting for it. Because the professional staff today is not the same professional staff that I knew.
Yes. This is some career.
Yeah, well,
thank you so much for sharing all of this with me. This has been a wonderful day.
Well, thank you.
Now, this is the second house that you lived in when you were here on the grounds. This is where you lived until 1979.
That's correct.
When to 1979 did you live in this house?
I can't remember exactly which date it was, but I do know it was these houses were for black physicians. Because they had brick houses back there where the white physicians would come here. Oh. But if they were ever have any black ones, they were going to be segregated into these 2 houses, psychiatrists.
All right, so this was a house that was originally
planned for.
It looks like a nice house.
Oh, it is a nice house. In fact, I think they've done some things to it since we were here. But it is a nice house, and we have a lot of very pleasant and nice memories from here. And a nice porch.
Okay. Now, you had a little porch back here?
Yeah, see the porch back here?
You had a large backyard.
A large backyard. I used to ride to work on my bicycle, and people used to just tease me because my cape would be flapping in the wind, and I'd ride to work over
Mary Poppins.
To work right from here. And of course, Litt was working down in the school building.
Yes.
Yes, that was really quite pleasant. It was a very nice life here for Philip, too.
Yes. Uncle Litt said that Philip had a little swing.
Yes, he did.
Swing there in the front. Yes. This is amazing.
Yes. And next door to us were the Oberholzers.
Ah.
And an interesting story about Oberholzer. She's came from in Pennsylvania, and they were Mennonites. And she told me that all her life she'd been told not to go and communicate with black people, Negroes, and Catholics, and I was both of those. We got to be such really good friends because she lived right next door. She watched my children, my son, and I'd watch her children, so we were really close friends.